Ladies and gentlemen, it's me, Jesse Lewis. We are live with hypnotist extraordinaire Scott McFall. And Scott, we've got some housekeeping things that we're going to do first. You know, I haven't addressed it on the podcast, but this is specifically for the Performing Hypnosis Summit, and I haven't addressed Jim's passing at all. I only met Jim once, and it was through an interview just like this, and I wanted to address it because I think that something that's been lacking in our entire industry, the hypnosis industry, is somebody who was in a leadership position that could convey caring, if that makes any sense. Jim, to me, I talked to him a few times other than that podcast, and every time I talked to him, he actually gave a crap about what I was talking to him about. And I find that often trainers don't do that. They can't see downwards, if that makes any sense. Do you have any thoughts on Jim before we continue on and talk about what his impact was?
I really enjoyed Jim. You know, we were not personal friends or anything. We were colleagues, and we did some podcasts together. And I did the keynote for their digital summit during COVID and whatnot. And the thing is that he does give us something really special, in the sense that he was more externally curious. He, I think, for the most part, could keep his ego out of it and learn and be curious. And he was really a good audience. And I think that's the thing. A good general was a good private. And a great performer is a great audience. And I think he showed us how to do that. And I'm very sorry for his passing, and was very much looking forward to spending time with him. And that's why I think it's a really special year to be at the Performing Hypnosis Summit, in some ways celebrating Jim's experience and getting over, for those of the people who knew him much closer than I did, also just supporting their process of the shock and letting go and the change, because it's big. It's big. Ormond McGill in the stage hypnosis world is pretty much, was the man. And I think Jim was one of the rare people in stage hypnosis who was carrying on the tradition of kindness, because, Ormond was like meeting a living angel. The reason Ormond could influence so many people and suggest things to people is Ormond McGill was like hanging out with a living, breathing angel of a person. And of course you would do what he wanted or what he said. I mean, my goodness, you'd have to be a terrible person not to, honestly. And I think Jim understood a lot of that. And I think also he was a professional, and he was serving his family. And I think he was a very good example of somebody who did the tasks and the duties that a career where you work for yourself, the duties that are required. And there's a lot of them. I've been a consultant teaching people to do that now for an embarrassing number of decades. So, I guess that's my feeling, is that the best way we can respect what Jim was doing is to do a good job at this profession and what we are doing. Yeah. So, I mean, those are my thoughts, and I feel for the people who are much closer to him, even than I knew him as a colleague, but. Yeah. But I'm excited to go celebrate his outcomes and his legacy with the event, with Grant and everyone else. And so here we go, Jesse.
The thing about this is the Performing Hypnosis Summit is that we're going. I'm going to be in Vegas. Are you going to be in Vegas? I would assume yes. So. You're doing a big conference, or a big pre and post. Mm-hmm. Yes. So the thing about Vegas that I find so intriguing is we've got people coming from absolutely every level, whether it's people that have never done a show before, the beginners, and then we have the veterans that, like you, I'm going to consider myself a vet. I've been doing it for 20 years as my full-time job. Mm-hmm. I should be a vet by now.
Yeah, sure.
And so we have that distinction of having people that have the knowledge, and more knowledge than just having one mentor. There's 30 speakers there, or whatever it is. There's a lot of knowledge. There's thousands and thousands of shows. What do you find to be the distinction there between the veterans, what they're going to get, and what the beginners are going to really get?
Well, You know, when you fly airplanes, there's something called the flight review. When you fly every 2 years, you have to get in the plane with an instructor and they take you through a bunch of stuff. And in our business, there's no biennial flight review. There's no time when you get pulled out of your own head and your own artistic ego and your own, you know, I don't know if this is rated G or PG or R, but your
You
own
can swear.
BS.
You can swear.
Yeah. Your own BS. And the thing is that in artistic endeavors and the amount of admiration that we get as entertainers, the beauty of it becoming a group activity is being accountable outside of ourselves. You know, and it's and of course sometimes that accountability is full of it, and sometimes it's incredibly enriching and helpful and pulling us up in the way that we should be. But in our business, there's so much license to, you know, the system or person with the most flexibility controls the interaction. So a hypnotist tends to get more and more flexible until they're technically out of their mind, man. So like some of the veterans get help by getting kind of bumpers put around their, you know, hey dude, you're not really Elvis and the Beatles, let's take a deep breath and make this go differently. But the other thing the veterans get is how to economically make their career work better in the modern age digitally. And another thing the veterans get is how to make big money as a consultant with what we learn, the other little pieces of education to pull in that allow, like the kind of contracts that I have in advertising and marketing with big corporations, digital marketing corporations, and so on, and how that process came to exist in my life.
Yeah.
And so the beginners get, in the case of great teachers, they get from the ground up great foundational basics, cautionary tales that help them to lower the risk to keep the insurance available. They get clinical understanding of the things that maybe they've never seen, but they do happen, they do come up. Yeah. And so, but there's more than that. You're in Vegas, you're seeing what is possible. Your mind is being expanded. You're seeing multi-million-dollar productions. Maybe you go to a Cirque show and it blows your mind and you think, hey, with very little effort, carrying one little bag, I can use a little projection mapping to make this show totally different, even in a church basement.
Yep.
You know, who knows? Maybe you learn to simplify it and get rid of the stuff in your production that's just you're so worried about whether the show's good that you're taking away the charm of the hypnosis because you're upstaging the whole doggone show. There's a lot you can learn wandering around, getting a way to contrast what you're doing and your self-expression with what everyone else is doing. And I can tell you from great experience that there's nowhere that is worse at that than stage hypnosis.
I will agree with you completely and totally. The problem with us is, the truth is, we could read a book, and if we have enough guts, you can go do a show. That's the truth. It's not a good idea in any way, shape, or form, but that's how I start, and that's how many start.
Well, but you know, look at it kind of like this, Jesse. There's people who have enough outside awareness and other education where that would be a perfectly acceptable choice.
Yes.
But there are plenty of people where that would not be an acceptable choice. And either way, they'd benefit from outside direction. Either way, exactly. They'd benefit from outside direction. There are so many people who are attracted to this field because they want to be unique. The driving force is exclusivity. It's kind of an exclusive club. And the people who are genuinely good at it are even a more exclusive club.
Yep, I can agree with that.
So what happens is, you know, we have these driving forces. Maybe we want to be secure, or maybe we want to be unique, or maybe we want to be competent and smarty pants, or maybe we want to, whatever it is that our big driving core need is, we bring that to this profession. Yeah. A lot of the time we need to help each other to be doing it for the audience instead of for us. Absolutely. Doing it for the audience instead of for us. And in the beginning of self-expression, and especially for those artists, like I myself was a theater major originally, and came from a performance background that was relatively extensive as a kid. And because of that, it's almost sad when you become a great stage hypnotist, because you're not doing tricks. Nope. You're not showing them that you can juggle the fire. You're not showing them that you can, you know, jump through the hoop. You're not jumping your motorcycle over the canyon. you're helping them jump their motorcycle over the canyon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like being a brilliant teacher or Johnny Carson, and it's making other people shine and having them leave better than when you got there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that being at the conferences helps everyone to realize, hey, if these audiences and these participants don't leave better than when they got there, we won't have the ability to do these shows anymore.
Yeah. But there's a couple things about the conferences that I like, and one is one that Kevin says all the time. He says, find the mentor that you want to be. And the truth is, I'm never going to be Kevin. I'm probably never going to be Scott McFall. But there are people that have the same things that I do. I perform 40 shows a year max, and that's it. But I'm doing mostly corporate groups for pretty darn good pay. So when I look at Kevin and he's doing 300 shows a year, I'm like, that's way too much work. When I look at others that are doing 300 shows a year, I don't want to do that. I want to live where I live, and I want to get the mentorship that I need for my area, if that makes sense. When you look at the conferences you're doing, we're going to shift tangents here, but you're doing a pre-show or a pre-conference workshop is the correct word, and then a post-workshop as well.
Yeah, that's the same. That's actually the same workshop. It's a 4-day workshop.
Okay, and it's You Be the Star. Give me an overview of what's going to happen during that. Don't go too deep, obviously, because we want to have people show up and come to it. But what are the basics? What's 2 things that you can give without giving it all away?
You'll be forced to do it in front of the group. You will be forced to break through your fears of scrutiny, whether you're advanced or not advanced. The culture of it is that you will know that you can prove the states of mind to the satisfaction of the person you're working with. It will not be questionable. They will not be wondering if they were hypnotized by the time they're done in that training. Secondly, you will be getting theatrical feedback about you. Are you magnetic? Are you radiant? Are your nonverbals making the audience want to be there with you? Is the way you set up the stage correct? What's going on with your blocking and how you move in space? But there's also going to be the instant hypnosis stage show manual, which is the script that I always have people do 25 shows using before they start to be creative in order to get the nuts and bolts of the structure. There'll be a lot of things, but that 4-day is the one that, a lot of multi-million-dollar hypnosis careers started going to that 4-day over the last, 35, 40 years. So, it's and I haven't actually taught that. It hasn't been in my schedule because of the other trainings I've been doing for, 5 years or so. Maybe the only time I do it again,
So, dumb question. You talk about the other trainings you do. You're doing a speech at the Performing Hypnosis Summit, which is what we're promoting. It's selling from stage. That's pretty self-explanatory. But what type of stuff are you going to be talking about specifically for selling from stage? Is it specific hypnosis products, therapy, or are you talking other tangents like some other hypnotists have done?
Well, look, it's very simple. You understand that there's personal coaching, memory work, the stuff that is done clinically, doing it digitally. But the thing is that you got to sell it for the amount of money that makes you make money. So I'll be teaching how to sell $2,700 products to audiences, $4,700 concepts to audiences, tens of thousands of dollars of consulting to corporations, how that all works. And then the downsell products like the, audios, that kind of thing. But more importantly, it's learning how to see yourself at the time that you're at the point in your career where you should be making, $15,000 a quarter consulting for someone, as opposed to, gosh, I hope I can get $700 this weekend.
Yeah.
So we'll be demonstrating what veteran hypnotists have done with their career that does not meet the eye when you're starting, or even when you've been in it for a long time. And of course, there are going to be some very great hypnotists there that do everything from Tom Silver doing halftime shows in huge auditoriums. But what I'm looking at is what are the multiple income streams in education, in consulting, in corporate work, in personal work that makes your life work very differently. You know, I'm sitting on a 43-foot sailing yacht as we're talking that I use to teach the sailing and NLP stuff that we do with 3 people at a time, for example. And if I wasn't a stage hypnotist and they didn't see what I do there, I wouldn't have the credibility. There's lots of people that teach the kinds of things that I teach. But as a stage hypnotist, they see a different competency in terms of understanding how to do what we do, don't they?
Yes. Well, absolutely. If you can manipulate 300 people in an audience, or 1,000 people in an audience, or 30 people in an audience, that goes to show the skills we have as hypnotists. And there is my favorite part of this business is there are trainers from every different aspect, from Jonathan Royal, who doesn't believe in hypnosis at all, which is fine, whatever.
Well, that's the position of Kreskin, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
It's fun to just see history just keeps repeating itself. It's very important to understand that over the years, there's been a tradition, and it's the same. I say this at every seminar, but it bears saying, as you brought that up. You understand that the way that you get people to watch is you have 2 people have a debate.
Yep.
And so in hypnosis, we are the first publicity geniuses. Because early on in Professor Leonardis's career, he would send his PR person in and he'd go to one cafe and tell them hypnosis is great. He'd go to the other cafe and tell them it was terrible. You wouldn't believe what he did in the other city. And the whole town would fight and they would pick it, and then the theater would be sold out. That's how it would work. And the thing that we as hypnotists need to remember is every myth and misconception about hypnosis was created by us on purpose. And a lot of hypnotists do not get this. Okay. So, you know, the credibility model is to state something controversial and prove it. And the problem is, if you don't do that, you're kind of boring. Now, the thing is, I've been a hypnotist in clinic through tens of thousands of clients, worked with hundreds of referring medical physicians and all of that sort of thing. So the way that I look at this is different. But there are a lot of publicity successful hypnotists on the web. And it's not that they don't do amazing things, but they have varying degrees of experience and varying types of experience. Exactly. And so they see things differently. But, you know, I just want to make the point that when you're at these summits, you're going to see a lot of opinions. And the question is, which way do we frame it that it protects the profession the best?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about what's happening now. A performing stage hypnotist isn't currently doing a third-party double-blind study. It is not an exercise in the truth. Yes. It is an exercise in the creation of belief. Expectation plus realization equals belief. And the way that I say the process that we're discussing is hypnosis reaction is directly dependent upon need. The characteristic of the way hypnosis goes, if someone has listened to an audio 100 times after they've gotten over the issue, it's not the same trance as if they still had the problem and they were getting over the issue. Mm-hmm. So the thing is that we have to ask, what keeps people booking stage hypnosis? What keeps people using the gift that we have to give them? And not, you know, hey, what are we debating about so that we feel smart? Because we're selling something.
That's the thing. That's what I love about PHS is there was so much division between so many hypnotists for so long. There was no real conference to go to where there would be 50 people that are like-minded. Well, like-minded enough to call us.
At least in stage hypnosis.
In stage, yes. Specifically for stage, because clinical is a whole different animal. It is, well, but it's not.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. You know,
yes.
A clinical hypnotist should be a great stage hypnotist, and they shouldn't see it as separate. And that's why the values and attitudes of the way the stage hypnotists handle themselves is so incredibly important.
Yeah.
You know, one of my students was on a national TV show once, and we got into a big argument because he handled himself just great, but the way the show framed things made it look questionable.
Yes.
And PR is a double-edged sword. PR is a double-edged sword. And so you got to ask yourself, how is this going to really look in the long run? And so I'm just saying, it's great that the conference has all these people doing similar things. It's great that the controversies exist. It's great, and the thing you got to realize is some of the people picking controversy are smart enough to know what that's doing for both you and them.
And them.
And it's okay.
Let's be honest. Most of the time, I'm going to go to WWE. They purposely create controversy between the wrestlers, right? That's the whole point of the show, is to create controversy between the wrestlers. Houdini used to do this with other magicians. He would have he'd be the psychics. He'd say all the psychics are crap, and he would call out the psychics. That wasn't to call out the psychics. It was a marketing ploy. It really was. James Randi did the same thing. It was a marketing ploy against and against Kreskin and against Uri Geller. It was a marketing ploy to be able to get more bookings for everybody, to be honest, but for him specifically.
But it does empathize with the, like Randy and these types of things. They empathize with a person who's potentially duped, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And the thing is that I'm not sure that I think some of that starts from a sincere wishing to educate. I think some of it really does come from a sincere desire to educate. However, they sometimes go really, really far. They go really, really far. And, I loved the stuff that both of them did, but I also saw them go too far a couple of times,
Yes, absolutely.
But with regard to being at the conference, the idea is, imagine yourself 6 months later and you've got new tools, new ways of looking at things. You feel more secure on stage. Your understanding of everything you need to do, from how you dress to what you happen to bring along to what you do not bring along, to how the chairs are set, to the way that the pre-show is set up, to why you don't want to be a surprise to an audience as a stage hypnotist. You want them to anticipate your being there, and why, and how to set that up. And so you all of a sudden you leave there and you're validated by the fact that you're a member of a community. You have a sort of support, and you feel better. If you're not a goofy narcissist or something, you feel better if you're in that community.
Absolutely.
And so it's a good idea, and I loved the way that Jim and Grant came at this. I really appreciated being involved in the other stuff that they did. They handled me just wonderfully. I mean, they handled me great. And, when I threw out the normal things that I do to play with people or test people, they were just awesome. They handled themselves great. So I think the culture is really good, Jesse.
That's
really
awesome. And I think it's changed. In 3 short years, I think we went from a bunch of disjointed stage hypnotists that were coming together, and we're actually starting to work together and understand what each other's needs are, which is amazing. We went through everything that was on the list, other than Jeff McBride and his school, specifically for feedback. What were we talking about Jeff McBride for before the interview?
Yeah, I do remember. You mentioned that you wanted to lift up all entertainment.
Yes, all entertainers.
And that meant, like, magicians, jugglers, comedians,
yes,
everybody. And so I mentioned that, the culture of the way that human enrichment is done through the Magic and Mystery School there in Vegas is really good. And, Jeff McBride's model of what he's done there, and what Larry Haas does, and also Abigail, is that right? Am I saying her name right?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
And yeah. And it's, they're all amazing, and they're all dedicated to human enrichment and skills expansion and perceptual expansion and self-acceptance expansion. And so it's quite a model for whether it wouldn't matter if it was therapists, teachers, corporate speakers, stage hypnotists. That ethos is the ethos that I put into the Master Hypnotist Society, which now has the schools in Canada and the US and around and all that, and setting that up and getting that culture going is tough. And I think that Jim and Grant started having that same wonderful culture start
Mhm.
here at this conference and in their groups and in their groups online. And I think that, uh, if entertainers are looking for that kind of culture, whether they're a magician or not, there are a few things to check out in the way that Larry Haas and Jeff McBride and all the people at Magic Mystery School happen to pursue
Mhm.
personal development as an entertainer. And some of that is like cathartic or personal growth oriented in the sense that it's like being at Lee Strasberg's method acting school or something, where you're really getting out of where you used to be and able to be what is needed and very aware of what is needed in those rooms when you're a live performer. And it's magical. And I think they just do a brilliant job. So I just wanted to mention that the overall culture has a lot to do with how we protect each other.
Absolutely. You know, as I listen to you speak, I'm reminded of a couple things from my personal history. And one of them is one of my mentors says there's no bad audiences, which I've always agreed with, but there's only bad entertainers. And what you're talking about is, from what I hear, maybe it's incorrect what my thought process is, but what you're talking about is we need to look at ourselves and use others' ideas to refine what we do, is what it really comes down to, and to be open to. We're not. You talked about cult leaders, or you talked about before where we're all stuck in our own heads. For 60 minutes, we're a cult leader. We're in front of that audience. We're getting yays, happiness, all that stuff. And it really goes to a lot of our heads that we begin to think we're the best entertainer ever. And even a bad hypnosis show is better than a lot of other shows. So it's really hard to break that. I know. It is really hard to break that ego that a lot of people have, though, to be able to learn, from
Hmm.
others. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, I'll mention that, like, for example, when you're teaching people, there's phases they go through: dependence, independence, and then intra-dependent cooperation, right?
Yeah.
And the question is, if they've never learned to mind, if they have issues with regard to following directions or reacting to the outside world, sometimes as a trainer, you're working on that dependency phase where you really need them to surrender a position in order to learn. It's kind of an ego down process.
You almost have to prove them wrong.
Yeah, and then after that, there's this, hey, you can do it on your own, because after that, they're going to be sketchy about doing it on their own. And then it has to be, you can do it all on your own. And then it has to be, here's how you need the outside world cooperating and yourself in order to carry forward in this more mature position where you still can connect to others, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Because what happens a lot is they boundary up and become hyper independent. And when they're hyper independent, they never mature into the intra-dependent position. Now, I spend a lot of time on this with the people I train in the behavior side of this, in the helping people change, the personal growth, the personal coaching, the hypnosis and clinics, all of that. Enormous time, in a sense, jacking people around to know where they're at in this process and then to help them through this process. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who believe everyone's supposed to prove they're independent, that that's how they arrive and get a self-esteem. Well, that's not really true. And so as a trainer, as a teacher, you want to be very good at doing in yourself even. You want to be good at knowing, am I willing to be a beginner and be externally dependent long enough to really learn what's being taught? When do I shift into independence and go ahead and get creative and apply it to the outside world and wing it and be okay winging it? And then when is it, hey, I really need the cooperation with these other people instead of freaking out about the teamwork aspect of this in order to do stuff? And even and especially a single stage hypnotist needs to be great at intra-dependent maturity to have the empathy for everyone that's on that stage and the empathy for the audience to keep everything going the way that it needs to go and to leave with the room better than they found it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a very important subject you bring up.
Yeah. I'm going to expand it even further than that. It's
Mm-hmm.
not. for me, it's not always just about the audience. Now, when I'm in front of them, it's absolutely about the audience. But expanding this into another realm of, it's also about serving your clients, because if they can't trust you to do what's best for them, then why would they hire you?
Right.
Why would they go with you in the first place? Does that make
Right.
any sense whatsoever?
Makes total sense in every possible way. Yeah. And ironically, I just lost the window you're in on my screen.
Oh,
but yeah,
it's okay. You're on camera.
Yeah, great. So, you know, it's really important to think about what you said, and that should almost be established before you even walk in. You know, what are their expectations? You know, and that's one of the things I love to ask, you know, do you want this to be a G movie or a PG movie?
Yeah. And the difference is, in one, you can't say the F word, but in a PG movie, you can say it one time. Isn't that right? Or something like that?
Well, I don't know that specific rule, honestly, but you get my point that that what I'm getting at is, if this goes perfectly, what's going to be true at the end of the show? How do you want this to go? And sure, you want to get that. And I remember the time I broke that rule the worst is when I still had a straitjacket escape shtick in my act like 30 years ago. And I didn't know that the president of a company was extremely proud in a really intense way, you know. And his staff was amazing and great, and we had a good time, and the show was going terrific, you know. But I wasn't sensitive to where this guy was at, and I got him up on stage, you know. And there are times when I do audience participation that's a little bit pulling people up on stage or getting them through their fear of scrutiny, and it's perfectly lovely and ecological. There are other times I do it in teaching where maybe it's really aggressive, but in this case there was no point of doing that whatsoever. And I got him up there and got him in the jacket before he was going to put me in the jacket, and he was furious. And he literally, when he was putting me in the jacket, picked me up by the crotch strap of the straitjacket and laid me on my face on the stage in front of 500 people, you know. And you know, I got stood back up, and I went to the mic and said, I know how you feel about this now. You know, but it was so aggressive because he'd had a couple of cocktails, you know. And it was funny because his assistant tipped me $500 because it was so odd, you know. And you know, we got along great after the show and everything, but I realized my sensory awareness of where he was at emotionally was just not good. I was caught up in the moment. I was caught up in whatever I was doing. And my focus was not on him. And that was my fault, you know. And when you do shows and things go right or wrong, our first, you know, I spent at least 20 minutes going, that guy was being a jerk. When what I should have been doing was, wow, that was an incompetent read of that guy.
Yep.
You know,
and here's the thing, that's where your ego cut in, right? It's, oh, that guy's a jerk. That's all ego.
That's right.
And if you look at it from a different point of view, you can say, well, maybe that guy maybe he didn't like me. Maybe he is just an asshole. That's fine. But maybe I embarrassed the living crap out of him.
They should be having as much fun as the audience, or we're doing it wrong. And the thing is that in that moment, I changed a lot of how I handle people. A lot of how I handle people. And I'm just suggesting that if I handle someone a certain way that's going to shock them in training, I'm getting paid to expand their world.
Yeah.
Very directly. But if I handle somebody in a way that is not making them have a wonderful night at an entertainment thing, well, and it's only an entertainment thing, that's a different matter, right? Yeah. And so just kind of having the self-respect to realize this is an art form. It deserves the same attention if you were doing classic sculpture, or if you were doing a symphony, or if you were designing a bridge. It deserves the same respect and meticulous attention to how people function as any other art form. It should not be seen as, hey, I showed up and people closed their eyes and followed my directions. That is to misunderstand the entire game that we are playing.
It is beautiful that you speak on this at such a high level, because a lot of entertainers don't. I liken it to building a bridge. You want that bridge to be there 100 years from now, even after you're dead. And what
Right.
we're doing by taking care of our audience and taking care of our clients is taking care of the entire industry. And a lot of people don't get that because we're such a small group. Let's be honest here. There's probably less than 100 actual working stage hypnotists in the US and Canada that actually make their full-time income.
Well,
Okay?
one of the things I would mention that I want everyone to learn is, we have a rule with my students. Your first show has to be over $1,000 in pay.
Yeah.
They're not
I
allowed to
always
do a
tell
free
my
show first. Yeah.
I tell my people that I work with first, you're allowed to do one free show for one charity that you actually support, and you're required to do that every single year, and that's the only free show you're allowed to do. Every time
Right.
after that, it's $1,500. If you're not
At
charging
least.
$1,500, don't do it.
Yep. At least. And
Yeah.
but if you're working with somebody who's used to getting $100 an hour or $50 an hour, and all of a sudden you say you're
Such a
getting
jump.
$1,000 or $1,500 an hour, they don't have the perspective yet to understand how many hours go into that hour you're doing a show.
That's
Now, at
exactly
this
it.
point, I don't do shows for that money myself, but I've been in this business a very, very long time. I also know the difference between getting in front of 300 people that I can make $50,000 in personal coaching that night, and my decision making might be very different
Yep.
than if I was just getting paid for shows alone. And so it's important to begin to understand that it's not about you, and it's not about proving competency. It's an art that you will be developing, like practicing a skill for the rest of your life, like practicing an instrument. Who was the famous musician when they were practicing in their 90s and somebody said, "Why do you still do that?" And they, I think I may be improving. I think I'm improving. I'm
Yeah.
making progress. I'm making progress. Well, that's how you need to look at this in my experience with it. And sure, there are people a lot smarter than me out there, but I would suggest that in my experience, this is how this goes.
Fantastic. We're at 37 minutes. Are you okay with 3 more minutes, Scott?
Go for it.
Awesome. I have my final question to you is, you talked about the guy that's going out for $750 on the weekend and performing a show. And he might have been doing that for, let's say he's 10 years in and he's worked every weekend. And then let's say there's another guy that is 10 years in and he's already making 10 grand a show. What is the difference between those two pricings that you actually see? Because the guy that's doing it every single weekend could actually be better at the show. But the guy that's making $10,000, what's the difference?
Well, this is really complicated. Like I'm also, magic, juggling. I do a lot of different things, right?
Yep.
And like I went back to get my close-up skills better a few years ago before COVID. I went out and was performing in the basement of the Magic Castle, staying in a sailboat out in Marina del Rey, and I drive up and I would do meticulous, tight, hard close-up. Because when I was a young magician, I got away with being funny. And I wasn't disciplined. And so I needed to prove to myself that I would sit there and be patient enough to do the irritatingly difficult stuff I was doing. I wasn't writing my own stuff. It was more like I was a top 40 band pulling in, like a cover band, pulling in this stuff and doing things that were disciplined that I did not have the discipline to do when I was younger. Okay. Why I'm saying this is there's a reason to take shows and to keep performing no matter what, because just sitting around waiting for shows, you start to rust. You start to rust. Your cognition starts to rust. How you look at the room starts to rust. What you're doing with your body and hand starts to rust. Even in a stage hypnosis show, when you haven't done them for a while and you walk up, you space out on little pieces that are very important, and it's, so what I'm saying is I don't want to disrespect the fact that this guy's going out doing these shows for less money. I don't want to disrespect that. I do if he's doing it because his ego is so down and he doesn't think he deserves more money or something, then I want to snap him out of it. But if he's getting rehearsed and he's getting tight and he's getting experience and he's getting better, I don't want to disrespect that. I don't. What stinks about it is if these are my clients and I'm getting $10,000 a show out of them and then they're paying him $750 and we're both losing essentially $9,250, that's a drag, right?
Yes.
And so I suggest that we want to start from the outcome that you have for your life and your career and work backward so you see the potential you're chasing. That way, as you're doing these bridge shows and all the other stuff you need to do, shows get more shows. If you're not in front of audiences, you're not getting referrals. If you're not in front of audiences, getting those cards and contacts out at the end and charming people as you connect, you're not getting more shows. It's just like priming a pump, getting water to flow. Shows get shows get shows. So it is true that until you have what we'll call prestige or celebrity, which is much harder to get today than it ever was before. I mean,
but it's also much easier in some ways.
Yeah, it's harder.
Some ways it is harder.
You can go through the motions of doing these podcasts and stuff, but it's just not the same thing as being on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where there are only 3 channels in the whole world, and all of a sudden you're a star for the rest of your life. And it took one appearance to do that. Those things don't exist anymore. They just don't.
That's right.
And so, how Kreskin became Kreskin does not exist in the world.
No.
Okay. When you look at people like Banachek who came up later, Banachek's celebrity came at a much higher price than Kreskin's celebrity, for example, in reality.
Yes. And he never reached Kreskin level. He never has. And that's
there
sad.
isn't. That's because there's no way to reach Johnny Carson's level. It's not about the mentalists. It's about the platform. So when we're looking at this, if you want $10,000 a show, you're going to get it because of celebrity status marketing, because you're a celebrity. There are several people in our field who've done that brilliantly. Tom Silver, lately Richard Barker has done a ton with that.
Lee up in Canada.
Yeah. But the all-time hero of it is Peter Ravine.
Yep.
Okay. The all-time hero of celebrity status marketing, with stage hypnosis is Peter Ravine. And he understood the game and understood living the myth in the same way that Jeff McBride would mention living the myth better than anybody. And his son is still out doing it, the Ravine stuff, and it's awesome. And I strongly recommend understanding Ravine's way of living the myth, Orman McGill's way of living his character, the congruence with which they live their celebrity, and the understanding that there is no private life in celebrity life, even if you think there is. There isn't. And so, you start to have to be a very congruent human being and be willing to kind of show flaws and all in a certain way that you're playing a game. And that's why celebrities become often very, very good at self-development. Matthew McConaughey would be a really good example of that. And there are others. So fall in love with celebrity.
It's really funny because after doing this for 20 years, you get invited to certain things, right? And I have never met a celebrity that was a jerk. Now, I'm sure they're out there, but many of them want to know what you do, how you can help their mindset, how they can get rid of more of their ego. Don't get me wrong, they have ego, but many of them are understanding on, hey, we need to figure out what else is going on in our lives and how we can actually improve. It's a really funny world to be in. Yeah.
Fall in love with it. That's one of the great things about, I've been a non-resident member of the Magic Castle for decades. And going out there, you meet a lot of celebrities in private clubs like that. And every single one of them humbled me because of how humble they are, how curious about others they happen to be. And a stage hypnotist needs to be a genius at that. Needs not putting it on, safe enough to be a genius at it. And, we always start by having to act as if we're that way, because until we're really comfortable, we're not that way. My dad came up to me, and I tell this story a lot, so I apologize if you've heard it, but I did a show at my dinner theater, Mysteria, when I still owned it, and I was so bored, and it was a packed house. It was a standing ovation, but I was just like, I need a sandwich, I'm fried. And I walked off stage, and my father said, "That is the best show you ever did." And the reason is because I was so comfortable, it was like I was doing it in my living room. It just do. And the thing is, it made everybody else shine, and it sat me back in a magnetic position in a bigger way than ever before, because I wasn't needy of anything in that room in any way. Right?
It's a weird concept to say, because you do need the volunteers, but having enough faith in yourself to do a show and have that outcome is an amazing feeling. I know that feeling actually.
Yeah. Well, Jesse, they need the chair that they're going to get in more than you need them in the chair they're going to go in.
That's fair.
And it's, can we help them know that?
That's
They
fair.
may need it for fun. They may need it to break through an adventure. They may need it as a firewalk of personal confidence. They may need it for just the comedy. And Austin says you're hot in the chat. I'm very happy for you.
Yes, you saw that. Eh?
Yeah. So that's great. And I just want them to need to be there and to enjoy that leverage on them. I don't want to lose the magnetism of being a hypnotist by us needing anything at all.
That's fair.
That's where our magnetism comes from. And so getting people centered in that way is magical. Getting the hypnotist centered in that way is magical. And trying to give a shortcut in the training so it doesn't take so many shows, so many years, so much experience before you realize this should be just like walking in to get a sandwich.
Yeah.
And that's because the more it's true that you feel that way, the more you're aware of the room, the more you're aware of the people in the audience, the more you're aware of what needs to happen for them. It's just so much easier.
And so I've got Michael Brody coming on in 10 minutes, just so you know. He's in our side here, by the way. But
I'm sure it'll be awesome.
He will. Have you met Michael before?
I don't think we've met. I don't think
Yeah.
we've met, but I know who Michael is.
Yeah. I find that what you're talking about is super essential to understanding where we can go with this. Because I think for a long time, our industry, specifically hypnosis, has not had anybody at the flagship of it. There hasn't been any real stars, if that makes any sense. And I think through what we're promoting with the Performing Hypnosis Summit, through classes like you're teaching during the pre and post, I think that's a way that many of us could break through to a different level. And I don't think anybody's taken the reins of that level to where it can be. I think
there's a lot of great people, Jesse. For example, Tom DeLuca touring NACA,
yes.
or me touring NACA. These people were incredibly successful. But back in the 80s and 90s, it's not like I was sharing my ultimate secrets of how I marketed all of that. Now I will. And the thing is, I know how to do that even on the internet better than most. But see, I'm working for my clients, not for me at this point.
Not for you.
My job is making stars, not being one. And so it's wonderful fun. But what we need is the awareness that you have to respect and pay for the secrets, because the person giving them paid a lot for them. In the sense, it's blood, sweat, tears, years, extreme amounts of money. And there's times I've had tens of thousands of dollars in PR people to get the secrets of what I happen to know about that on the internet right now.
Yeah.
So, we have to respect the people that we're getting those secrets from. Yeah. And me included. Everyone needs
and the other thing is to use them, to use that knowledge to actually do something, which is where a lot of people fail. They get the knowledge and then they don't actually do anything afterwards.
If you have more time than money, use your time to leverage it. If you have more money than time, use your money to leverage it. Leverage what you have now. So you have to risk public scrutiny when you're using your time to get that PR done. And you have to sit here at this screen doing things just like what we're doing right now. A lot,
Yes.
So I enjoyed talking to you, Jesse. I know we've gone over, and I really appreciated it. But you're getting me on topics that I'm very passionate about, because it has to do with matching the values inside of those performers, and I'm very passionate about that. So
yes, yeah. Well, I always we got 2 minutes, and then 1 minute, and I got to go. Performing Hypnosis Summit, everybody. I'm going to close it out. I'm not going to continue on this conversation. Scott, we're going to sit down over a coffee when I'm in Vegas with you, and I want to actually chat, if that's okay.
Be great.
I'll have a Hypno Cafe mug by that point that Dan is going to be bringing to me.
Awesome. Well, have a wonderful time. And Jesse, it was wonderful talking to you. And thanks very much. I'll let you off the hook. Have fun, man. Yeah.
Awesome. Before I end off, Scott, you're doing the selling from the stage. You're also doing a pre and post called You Be the Star. You do personal coaching. You founded a bunch of hypnosis schools all over the world, and you're one to watch. That's for sure, and learn from.
Thanks,
Thank
Jesse.
you, Scott. You have a great
Thank you.
day. See you later. Turn that off.